This is a mushrooms, peyote and cannabis trip report by 357, posted to heroid.org on February 9th, 2007. It was a warm Saturday evening in late June. I had a small stash hidden in my room, 8 peyote buttons and 1/8 of an ounce of dried mushrooms. The plan was to split everything with my friend Bryan. This would be my second experience with mushrooms, but the peyote was new to me. I had taken mushrooms once before, a dose of 1/16 of an ounce, and I remembered the mild visual distortions and the feeling that the floor was shifting beneath me. I thought those were just normal mushroom hallucinations. This night, however, would turn out to be something else entirely. It would become a night that opened my eyes to things that I had never imagined could be present in the world around me. We began at 6 o'clock in the evening. I ground the peyote as best I could with a pestle and mortar. The buttons had a very bark-like texture and did not turn into a fine powder. The small pieces were extremely bitter, so I swallowed mine with a glass of water. Bryan could not stand the taste, so he mixed his peyote into a slice of pizza and ate it that way. We both knew that peyote can take a long time to start working, sometimes up to 3 or 4 hours. We decided to take it early for 2 reasons. First, we wanted to give it enough time to kick in before we added any other substances. Second, if the peyote made us vomit, we would still have the mushrooms waiting for us later in the night. Around 9:45, we checked the clock. 4 hours had passed and I felt only a slight change in my head, a light buzz that had started about an hour earlier. It seemed as if the peyote was doing nothing. Our hope was fading. We decided to light a bowl of cannabis in the park near our house and then take the mushrooms. The cannabis would help us relax while we waited for the peyote to work. We walked to a nearby park that had a little league baseball field. Bright white lights shone over the field, giving the area a feeling of safety. After a quick cigarette, we sat on a bench and smoked a bowl together. Bryan wanted another hit, but I felt a little uneasy. I knew that too much weed could make me paranoid, but I gave in and we smoked another bowl. The park was known for having a lot of wild pigs, so we moved toward the wooded area away from the field lights. Just as we entered the trees, the overhead lights on the field flickered off and the whole place fell into darkness. My heart began to race. A wave of paranoia surged through my veins. I felt my pulse quicken. I wanted to get back to a place where there was at least a dim light. We hurried back toward the bathroom building that had a small, dim bulb inside. We lit 2 more bowls there. The bowls seemed to take forever to finish because my mind kept drifting to the idea of going home. I kept thinking about my mother, who usually expects me back by 11 at night. I knew that my eyes were already dilated and dark, and that I would look very out of it if I tried to talk to her. I also knew that the high would only get stronger after this point. The safest plan was to get home before the worst of it hit. At 10:45, we left the park and walked to a Dairy Queen for a couple of bottles of water. As soon as we stepped inside, the room seemed to pulse and glow. Ordering a simple bottle of water became a strange task. My hands shook a little and my tongue felt thick. I could see the lights in the room flickering in a slow rhythm, as if they were breathing. When we finally left the Dairy Queen, I realized that I was in a difficult position. My mother was probably already in bed reading. I could not go home looking like a zombie with dark, drooping eyes. I decided that we would try to get home as quickly as possible. At 11:15, I slipped into my house while my mother was still in bed. I locked the door behind me, whispered a good night, and slipped into my bedroom. The relief of being inside my own space was immediate. My room looked the same as it always does, but the air was thick with a faint, sweet smell of cannabis. The floor seemed to shimmer with a bright haze. Geometric patterns began to move across the carpet, shifting and breathing. It was as if the room itself was alive. I did not feel completely tripped out. Rather, I felt that there was far too much happening at once for my mind to understand. The park had triggered a switch that turned what could have been a normal night into something far more intense. Only 15 minutes after I entered my room, the feeling of time changed. 15 minutes felt like 2 hours. The peyote and the mushrooms seemed to join forces and hit me hard. My earlier mild paranoia turned into a full-blown wave of fear. I tried to calm myself by sitting in silence, hoping that the room would settle. Bryan, however, was moving around, talking loudly and asking me for food. I kept telling him to stop moving, to stop talking, and to stop asking me for anything. He did not listen. Every time he made a noise or moved, it pulled me back down into a darker emotional state. I imagined an invisible meter inside me, with a needle that could swing toward positive or negative. When Bryan kept acting, the needle stayed on the negative side. I needed the room to be still for the needle to move toward the positive side, but he would not stop. At midnight, the noise finally faded. Bryan stopped moving after about half an hour of me pleading with him. I sank into a chair, head in my hands, and let the overload of thoughts settle. The chaotic swirl of images and sounds began to calm more quickly than I expected. The room felt warmer, more comforting. The geometric patterns were still shifting on the floor, but they no longer bothered me. I looked at Bryan, and we both understood, without words, that we were now sharing the same state of perception. We fell into a quiet trance for several minutes. Our silence was broken when Bryan's cell phone rang. I went to the bathroom, sat on the toilet, and watched the floor shift beneath me. Strange noises began to echo inside my head. The shag rug seemed to sway back and forth as if it were underwater, producing a soft, aquatic melody. In the background, I could hear a faint conversation between two people that I could not make out. I returned to my bedroom and saw that Bryan had a blank stare, as if he were looking through a veil. Everything felt strange but manageable. We decided to smoke another bowl, just to see where the night would go. This was the point at which my whole idea of what a trip could be changed. After 2 more bowls, the intensity increased. I was not scared, but I sensed that something beyond simple illusion was happening in the room. The noises in my head grew louder. Bryan's face showed a "I do not know" expression, so I turned off all the lights except for a small blue fish lamp that gave the room a soft glow. I asked him, "Are you hearing voices?" He replied, "I do not know. I really do not know how to explain what is happening." I told him to be quiet and listen. When we both fell silent, faint voices began to emerge. They were not clear words, but tones that we could repeat. I tried to mimic the first sounds I heard. Bryan looked at me with shock and said, "No way." We took turns repeating the sounds. The voices ranged from a little girl's giggle to snippets of conversation to a distant melody, and even the sound of knocking on a door. There was too much to describe in a single sentence. At the same time, images began to appear in my mind's eye. The first image was a row of water wheels turning slowly. I asked Bryan what he saw, and he described the same thing. We closed our eyes and began to describe everything we saw together. The images grew more complex. We saw multicolored patterns, strange tunnels, and places that looked like they were from another century. One of the images was Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man holding a prism that looked like the cover of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon album. I could not make sense of any of it, but I wanted more. We decided to take another bowl to go deeper. While we smoked the third bowl, the noises in my head grew louder still. At one point, just as I was holding in a hit, I heard someone cough. The cough seemed to be timed exactly with my own cough, as if some unseen presence knew I was about to cough and made a joke of it. After that bowl, something unexpected happened. The room began to glow very brightly and then dim down in waves. It felt as if energy was flowing in from one corner of the room and exiting from another. When the energy entered, my body temperature rose, and I felt a tingling, burning sensation. When the energy left, I felt a cold shiver. The feeling shifted back and forth like being covered in a mixture of hot and cold gels. Bryan felt the exact same thing, which made the experience even stranger. Later, as the night wore on, the room turned a dull gray, and tiny tiki figures began to dance on the surface of my closet door. The trip continued to shift in mood without affecting my own emotional baseline. I realized that my bedroom, and especially the closet, seemed to act as a portal of some sort. My friend Bryan had once told me a story about a stone soldier that emerged from his closet during a DXM trip. He said the soldier was huge, and that he had to crush it into a ball and set it on fire. At the time, I thought he was just describing a wild hallucination. Now, standing in my own room, I felt a strong sense that something angry was watching me from behind the closet door. I closed the door and kept it shut for the rest of the night. The feeling of being watched did not leave until the early morning. The night finally began to wind down around 5 in the morning. Bryan decided he had had enough and went to sleep on the couch. I turned on the television to distract myself from the lingering sensations. My mind slowly cleared, and I was able to fall asleep around 6 o'clock. Before I drifted off, I caught a final fragment of a message that seemed to come from somewhere beyond my own thoughts. It was brief, but it stayed with me. The most important insight from this night is that we both saw, heard, and even felt the same things at the same time. The synchronicity was so precise that it could not have been a coincidence. The most common images were tunnels of many different geometric shapes. These patterns appeared in every hallucinogenic experience I have had, and they always seem to have some hidden meaning. I do not know what that meaning is, but I feel that there must be one. Another striking vision was a scene that looked like it came from the 1800s, with people in old clothing standing on a street that was lit by gas lamps. I also saw a clear image of an alien figure standing on my wall, its eyes glowing. I cannot explain how I received these visions, except to say that some part of my mind, perhaps a third eye, was simply tuned in to a frequency that allowed me to receive them. It was not imagination in the normal sense. It was more like watching a movie that was being projected directly onto my consciousness. I could move my attention around the scene and see details without losing the overall picture.